In the wake of an incident that took place on February the 9th of 2024, 57-year-old Magisterial District Judge Sonia Knight, suspended from service in her home state of Pennsylvania at the time, stood accused of shooting a man who had done her wrong for the second time. Her ex-boyfriend, Michael McCoy, had ended things with her after a year-long tryst, only to have her allegedly shoot him in the face as he slept. He had come home from a night out and found McKnight sitting on the couch, sporting a comfy set of pajamas and clearly intending to stick around after having been told to move out multiple times. He went to bed around 11 p.m. that night and was awakened by excruciating pain in his head. McKnight, who was standing over him, insinuated that he had... She called 911, stating that she had been sleeping at the time and had been ripped out of sleep by her boyfriend's screams. McCoy later told investigators that he didn't shoot himself. Officials went on to obtain doorbell camera videos that showed McKnight leaving the house earlier in the evening, contradicting a statement that she'd given them. This was enough to lead to her arrest. The final nail in the coffin was a test that ended up showing gunshot residue on the judge's hands. She was ultimately charged with attempted murder and aggravated assault, with bail set to the tune of $300,000. This happened not long after McKnight was cleared in the shooting of her ex-husband, Enoch McKnight, which happened back in 2019. He was over at her place to help her move some furniture, while the pair's divorce was still pending in county courts, and was shot in the hand and groin. McKnight claimed self-defense and successfully avoided prison. She was away from her post at the time due to a suspension stemming from multiple misconduct allegations, including using a photo of herself in judicial robes for product promotion, asking an aide to ignore a civil suit filed against her, and being too generous with her staff's vacation time. This was all in violation of a judicial probation period that she was on following misconduct due to a traffic stop which involved her son. As of the latest updates, McKnight is still behind bars and a trial date has yet to be set up. Number 22. Albert Murdoch. In July of 2011, Albert Murdoch, a senior judge from Bernalillo County, Albuquerque, faced arrest on rape charges after a prostitute he hired secretly recorded him committing assault on her by going far beyond what he had paid for, violating her consent. The 59-year-old judge was caught on tape bragging about his immunity and connections to law enforcement, leading to public scrutiny of his 25-year career. The arrest triggered a review of cases he presided over, casting a shadow over his reputation for dispensing strict judgments. During a hearing on July 22, 2011, Judge Murdoch faced a dramatic turn in his trial as his defense counsel portrayed him as a victim, leading to the elimination of his $50,000 bond and his release on his own recognizance. Amid calls for his suspension without pay and ongoing investigations exploring potential extortion motives behind the victim's actions, doubts emerged regarding the veracity of the allegations against Murdoch. No further updates were available on exactly how the case ended. Suffice it to say that the scandal ended his career. He passed away 8 years later, on April 16, 2019, at the age of 67. Number 21. Tracy Soderstrom. In February of 2024, Judge Tracy Soderstrom of Lincoln County District in Oklahoma resigned following revelations of inappropriate behavior during a murder trial. Soderstrom was found to have sent over 500 texts and engaged in Facebook scrolling during the trial for Christian Tyler Martzal, who faced charges related to the fatal beating of his girlfriend's son. During the trial, Soderstrom's actions included sending texts, scrolling through social media, and displaying insensitive behavior. Martzal was ultimately convicted of second-degree manslaughter for the 2018 death of Braxton Danker, a 2-year-old found with extensive injuries including broken bones and open wounds. Braxton's mother, Judith Danker, who testified during Martzal's hearing, had previously accepted a plea deal in 2019, resulting in a 25-year prison sentence for enabling or permitting child abuse. Despite Danker's emotional testimony, Soderstrom was observed scrolling on her phone, displaying a lack of attention and empathy during critical moments. Following a petition filed in October citing Soderstrom's inappropriate texts that mocked legal professionals involved in the trial, the judge faced accusations of partiality and neglect of duty. In her resignation statement, Soderstrom mentioned her commitment to impartiality but acknowledged faltering due to her human imperfections. The council's investigation revealed text exchanges where Soderstrom disparaged state prosecutors, displayed favoritism towards the defendant, and made inappropriate comments during the trial proceedings. In the aftermath of the incident and her resignation, Soderstrom agreed not to pursue any future judicial positions in Oklahoma, indicating a shift towards utilizing her legal skills as an advocate rather than in a judicial capacity. Number 20. Jeffrey Ferguson. In August of 2023, 72-year-old Orange County, California Superior Court Judge Jeffrey Ferguson was arrested for allegedly shooting his wife, Cheryl Ferguson, at their Anaheim home. Following reports of a shooting at their upscale residence, Cheryl was found dead when officials arrived on the scene. Ferguson was immediately arrested. He was initially held on a $1 million bail. Ferguson pleaded not guilty, contending that the shooting was entirely accidental. He was ultimately released on bail to await trial. The accused judge was forced to follow a number of regulations as conditions of his temporary freedom. These include things like staying away from alcohol, giving up firearms, surrendering his passport, and even wearing a location monitoring device. Ferguson's career includes serving as a judge handling criminal cases in Fullerton, Orange County, with past recognition for his legal work, but ethical concerns related to his social media activities have arisen in the past. As of the latest updates, Ferguson is still awaiting trial. Number 19. Brian Lovel. On September the 22nd of 2023, 58-year-old Oklahoma Judge Brian Lovel was arrested in Austin, Texas for allegedly firing a gun at parked cars while driving, resulting in a collision with at least one vehicle. Lovel, an associate district judge in Garfield County, Oklahoma, was taken into custody following road rage and shooting incidents on September 11th of that same year. He was released on a $10,000 bond and ordered to undergo a mental health evaluation after being charged with reckless driving and engaging in deadly conduct with a firearm. According to police reports, Lovel intentionally crashed into a woman's vehicle, claiming she had cut him off in traffic. Witnesses reported Lovel firing shots while driving, with his actions captured on video recordings. The incident escalated as he allegedly collided with the woman's car twice and attempted to push her vehicle into oncoming traffic. Police found a gun and magazine in Lovel's SUV, matching descriptions provided by witnesses. Recent court documents have also linked shell casings from shootings in Texas and Oklahoma to Lovel's gun, with spent shell casings recovered from incidents involving his family members. Investigations revealed a connection between Lovel's actions in Austin and the drive-by shooting at a relative's home in Bison, near Enid. The ATF in Austin confirmed the shell casings matched, prompting authorities to request Lovel's GPS records and church attendance details for further scrutiny. Paul Woodward, the presiding administrative judge for Garfield County, expressed disbelief over the allegations, stating that Lovel agreed not to preside over cases until his legal matter is resolved. Lovel's attorney, Stephen Jones, described him as congenial and reasonable, emphasizing his respected reputation within the legal community. The Oklahoma State Supreme Court will determine any disciplinary actions against Lovel following the ongoing investigations. As of the latest updates, legal proceedings are ongoing. Number 18. Sally Hancock. On November the 4th of 2023, Arizona Judge Sally Hancock ultimately submitted her permanent resignation after she was arrested on suspicion of extreme DUI by Prescott police. The incident unfolded in March when a concerned citizen reported a possibly impaired driver leading to Hancock's arrest and subsequent conviction for misdemeanor DUI in May. Hancock was a licensed attorney in Arizona since 1996 and served on the Yavapai County bench since 2010. But after spending a day in jail for the DUI and paying a fine of $1,650, she agreed to relinquish her judicial role permanently as part of her penalty. During the arrest, Hancock was found parked outside a grocery store and was pulled over by a police officer, subsequently failing several sobriety tests. Despite initial denials, Hancock admitted to drinking and driving, stating that she had consumed a couple of glasses of wine a few hours earlier. Breathalyzer tests revealed blood alcohol concentrations well above Arizona's DUI threshold of 0.08%, with readings at 0.158%, 0.219%, and 0.214%. She also failed a number of field sobriety tests. In a body camera video, Hancock can be heard acknowledging her position of authority as a judge, but expressing remorse for her actions, falling back on emphasizing her humanity as a means to get her point across. Despite citing her judicial status during the incident, Hancock accepted the consequences of her actions, leading to the Arizona Supreme Court's decision to conclude the matter swiftly while upholding the judiciary's integrity and the interest of public safety. The resolution of Hancock's case also resulted in the cessation of further disciplinary investigations by the state agency. Hancock's admission and cooperation with law enforcement, coupled with her decision to step down from her judicial role and any future ones, marked the conclusion of this ordeal. Number 17. Rafeb Gaffa. 54-year-old immigration judge Rafeb Gaffa of Essex, UK, found himself at the center of a legal scandal after being convicted for collaborating with a group of lawyers and legal professions in a fraudulent legal aid scheme amounting to £1.8 million. Gaffa, along with 6 others including a fellow barrister, solicitors and a clerk, faced charges of conspiracy to commit fraud between September 11, 2011 and October 3, 2012. They were accused of submitting false claims to the courts. During the trial, Judge Philip Birtle KC expressed the grave severity of the crime, condemning the attempt to dishonestly claim large sums of public money through forged documents. The prosecution revealed that Gaffa and his associates had successfully claimed over £470,000 out of the total £1.8 million they sought, based on fraudulent legal cost claims related to criminal proceedings at Bournemouth Crown Court. Officials also went after Gaffa's wife, 52-year-old Karina Maciel, but she was ultimately found unfit to stand trial due to health reasons. Following the trial, Ghazi Khan, described as one of the ringleaders, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Meanwhile, Gaffa, who vehemently denied any greed, was found guilty. His conviction, alongside that of other corrupt legal professionals, signified the end of a lengthy legal battle and marked a step towards justice in reclaiming the fraudulently obtained proceeds. As of the latest available updates, Gaffa is awaiting sentencing. Number 16. Harriet Thompson. In January of 2023, Judge Harriet Thompson of Brooklyn, New York's Surrogates Court, stepped down permanently in the wake of a misconduct case centered around allegations that she had made homophobic and racist remarks about her fellow judges. Thompson, who served as a surrogate court judge since 2019, cited a shoulder injury as the reason for her inability to defend against the misconduct charges. The State Commission on Judicial Conduct revealed that Thompson agreed to retire on March 1st and would never seek judicial office again. The misconduct claims against Thompson, which included derogatory remarks about homosexuality and Hispanic individuals, prompted her suspension by the Office of Court Administration in December of 2021. The subsequent charges by the CJC in May of 2022 highlighted instances of bias, substantial delays in court duties, and failure to complete mandatory ethics education. Despite having a pending CJC hearing at the time, Thompson decided instead to tender her resignation, allowing her to retain her judicial pension. Thompson's attorney, Andrew Fisher, attributed her resignation to a disabling shoulder injury necessitating surgery, impeding her ability to participate in her defense, while maintaining Thompson's innocence and emphasizing the absence of formal findings of wrongdoing. Fisher acknowledged the gravity of the allegations. CJC Administrator Robert Tembekjian expressed that the case against Thompson warranted her removal from office, yet her claimed medical condition redirected the proceedings towards her permanent departure from the bench. Number 15. Gerald Garon. In December of 2009, former New York Judge Gerald Garon was released only about 2.5 years into what was supposed to be a 3-year minimum sentence, sparking outrage among locals. Back in 2007, Garon had been convicted of multiple counts related to corruption and bribery scandals, with the sentence handed down for between 3 to 15 years. His time served ultimately depended on factors such as his behavior in prison, his completion of alcohol courses, and more. Garon had opted to take various classes as part of a state program that allows non-violent felons to shave time off their sentences. Garon had been serving some of his sentence in a halfway house because it came out during his trial that alcoholism was apparently a factor in some of the problematic decisions he was found to have made. Dozens of witnesses took the stand, many of whom were angry parents whose custody cases he had fixed against them because of bribes from the other parent. Garon was ultimately found to be fixing cases leading to his sentencing. When Garon emerged, he was met by his wife, who offered him an embrace. His first words once freed were reportedly, "It's always nice to be with your family," words that had an ironic and even mocking ring for some of the protesters that also greeted him as he was freed. Many of them claimed that he had wronged them and even tore families apart. Number 14. Joe Brown. The star of the hit reality court show, Judge Joe Brown, was arrested on March the 24th of 2014 and charged with 5 counts of contempt of court. In addition to regularly appearing on television during his series' run of 15 seasons, Brown formerly served as a criminal court judge in Shelby County, Tennessee. As a favor to an acquaintance, Brown had agreed to review a child support case being presided over by Magistrate Harold Horn. According to Horn's account of the incident, Brown grew increasingly hostile towards the magistrate after he refused to discuss ancillary details of the case that were not written in the schedule. Brown repeatedly shouted at Horn and challenged his judicial authority. The outburst resulted in the former TV judge being sentenced to 5 days in jail at the Shelby County Corrections Facility in Memphis. Brown's behavior proved detrimental on a grander scale, as his arrest occurred during his campaign for the county's district attorney position. He went on to lose the general election to the Republican incumbent, earning just 35% of the vote. Number 13. Jessica O'Brien. Jessica O'Brien stepped down from her position on the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois, after it emerged that she'd committed mortgage fraud during her career as a realtor. O'Brien had owned and operated a real estate company for a number of years prior to her judicial election. In November of 2012, the 51-year-old had risen to prominence as the first Filipina judge elected in Cook County's history. Her husband, Brendan, was a fellow circuit judge, and the couple were well respected within their community. According to O'Brien's 2017 indictment, the judge and her former business partner, Maria Bartko, had exaggerated their company's sales numbers in an effort to fraudulently obtain mortgages on 2 properties in the city of Chicago in 2004 and 2006. The inflated figures that O'Brien put on her mortgage applications ultimately defrauded her lenders of $1.4 million. She was brought to trial on bank and mortgage fraud charges and convicted of her crimes in February of 2018. O'Brien appeared remorseful during her court proceedings, tearfully shouting, "I'm an embarrassment," at one point in the trial. Despite her apparent contrition and her cries for leniency from the federal judge in charge of her case, she was ultimately sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison. In the wake of her conviction, O'Brien formally resigned from the court. Number 12. Cynthia G Impero. Cynthia G Impero of Florida's 17th Circuit Court was arrested and charged with driving under the influence on November the 5th of 2013. On the night of her arrest, the call was made to 911, reporting an erratic driver who'd almost crashed their white Mercedes-Benz into multiple vehicles on the roadway. An hour later, a Broward County police officer initiated a traffic stop with Impero, who was driving a vehicle that matched the 911 caller's description. The officer had spotted Impero as she swerved and came perilously close to hitting a parked car, and thus pulled her over. The circuit judge initially refused to follow the policeman's request for her to exit the vehicle, claiming she was going to call her attorney. She was unable to dial the numbers on her cell phone, however, and she then begrudgingly agreed to step out onto the sidewalk. The officer noted that Impero was visibly unstable as she made strenuous attempts to get out of the car, having to use the door to prop herself up. Impero refused to take a breathalyzer test, causing her driver's license to be suspended automatically. She pleaded not guilty to DUI charges in December of 2013, but was ultimately sentenced to 20 days of house arrest and a year of probation. The judge stopped presiding over criminal cases following her conviction, and in 2015, the Florida Judicial Qualifications Committee recommended she be given a 90-day suspension, as well as a $20,000 fine as a result of her DUI. While awaiting a final ruling by the Florida Supreme Court, Impero made the decision to resign in February of 2016. Number 11. Diane Vitori Carabello. A former Mahoning County Court judge was convicted of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from one of her deceased clients in June of 2019. 50-year-old Diane Vitori Carabello of Youngstown, Ohio, was first elected as a Sebring Court judge in 2002 and was subsequently re-elected to the position in 2006 and 2012. In addition to her judicial responsibilities, Carabello also operated a private law practice. One of her clients was Robert Sampson, whose will she'd drafted prior to his death in 2015. She then submitted an application to administer Sampson's estate, falsely claiming that he'd passed away without leaving a will. The court instead handed administrative duties over to Sampson's sister, Dolores Falgiani. Carabello prepared Falgiani's will on November 3rd of 2015. Most of her estate was left to various friends and family members, while the rest of it was given to 2 animal charity organizations in the area. Falgiani ultimately passed away in March of 2016, at which point Carabello filed an application to probate her deceased client's will. While reviewing Falgiani's estate, the judge reported the discovery of $20,000 in cash in the woman's home, which was then purportedly deposited into her estate. During the next 2 years, Carabello filed reports of newly discovered assets on a number of occasions. With each report, the judge secretly siphoned varying amounts of money from her late client's fortune. In total, Carabello stole $328,000 from Falgiani's estate, the full amount of which she was ordered to pay in restitution upon her conviction. She was also sentenced to 30 months in prison and 3 years of supervised release. Number 10. Timothy Nolan. In 2018, a district judge from Campbell County, Kentucky, was found guilty on human trafficking charges and other related felonies. Timothy Nolan, aged 71, held his judicial office for nearly 3 decades, during the course of which he'd become well known for his strict sentences and hardened courtroom demeanor. He was also a staunch political activist, having worked closely with Donald Trump's presidential campaign in 2016. The former judge became the focus of an investigation which revealed that he targeted a total of 19 young women over a period of many years, forcing them to perform intimate acts against their will. Nolan reportedly made his victims take sedatives so as to prevent them from resisting his advances. As per his predatory modus operandi, he would threaten to arrest them or evict them from their homes if they contacted law enforcement or refused to perform the acts he demanded. Nolan ultimately pleaded guilty to the 21 various charges levied against him in court. Although he attempted to prolong his trial by firing his attorney and threatening to withdraw his guilty plea, Nolan was eventually sentenced to the maximum prison term of 20 years and was also ordered to pay a fine of $100,000. Number 9. Lyn Rosen. Florida Judge Lyn Rosen was taken into custody by police after she collided with a concrete median and struck a patrol car on the way to work. Rosen approached the judge's parking lot at the Broward County Courthouse shortly before 9 a.m. on May the 27th of 2014. A deputy present at the scene witnessed the sitting judge driving erratically as she sideswiped a parked police car with her BMW. She kept driving, eventually crashing into the security gate near the entrance to the parking lot. She reversed her vehicle and hit the gate several more times. The deputy stopped her and requested she exit the car. Rosenthal was noticeably unsteady and struggled to step out onto the pavement. Her speech was slurred and she freely volunteered the information that she'd been involved in another crash earlier that morning. Rosenthal said that a truck had tried to run her off the road, causing her to collide with a median on the interstate. She claimed to have recorded the incident with her cell phone camera. Officers reviewed the footage Rosenthal had captured, only to discover that the judge had crashed into the divider due to her own inability to stay in a single lane and not because of any other vehicle. Although there was no alcohol found in Rosenthal's system, she did admit to taking an Ambien pill the night before her arrest. She was charged with a DUI and eventually resigned from the 17th Circuit Court in October of 2015. She was the third Broward County judge found guilty of driving under the influence within a 6-month period after the convictions of Cynthia Impero and Giselle Pollock. Number 8. John A. Westheimer. On March the 4th of 1996, an innocent woman was wrongly convicted of murder and arson. She was sentenced to 60 years in prison by Circuit Judge John A. Westheimer of Decatur County, Indiana. Christine Bunch, who was 22 years old and pregnant at the time of her conviction, had survived a house fire which had engulfed her living trailer and taken the life of her son, Anthony. An investigation into the origins of the blaze was subsequently conducted by a state arson analyst named Brian Frank. He determined that the fire had been started at 2 separate locations within the mobile home, and that a liquid accelerant such as kerosene or lighter fluid had helped spread the flames throughout the rest of the residence. Based on Frank's findings, which were corroborated by a federal forensic investigator, Bunch was arrested for igniting the deadly fire. At Bunch's 1996 trial, Judge Westheimer baselessly accused the woman of getting herself impregnated in order to avoid serious punishment. He insisted that she would not be the one to raise the child she was carrying before handing down the maximum prison sentence of 60 years. Bunch served more than 17 years behind bars before she was eventually exonerated of the crime. Investigators ascertained that the kerosene present in the home at the time of the fire could have been attributed to the kerosene-powered heater in the living room. As a result of this discovery, it was determined that the accelerant was not poured on the floor by Bunch, as the prosecution had previously argued in court. Westheimer retired in January of 2012, just a few months prior to Bunch's release from prison. Number 7. Leticia Aaso. In November of 2019, former Rochester City Court Judge Leticia Aaso was sentenced to 180 days in jail for violating the terms of her probation. Aaso's legal troubles had started with a DWI in February of 2016, which resulted in a crash on Interstate 490 near Mount Read Boulevard in the state of New York. No one was hurt, but the front of her car was damaged and both tires on the driver's side were flat. She was sentenced to a 1-year conditional discharge, the terms of which involved no alcohol consumption and an ignition interlock device installed on her car. She violated the terms of her probation that same year by attempting to drive while intoxicated and was placed in an alcohol treatment program. Her highly publicized case would see Aaso attempt to circumvent the interlock on her car on multiple occasions, and there were several reports indicating that she continued abusing alcohol. The repeated violations of her probation conditions resulted in Aaso being sentenced to 60 days in jail in 2017. She was ultimately removed from her duties due to the gravity and impact of her behavior. In late October of 2019, Aaso again appeared in court, claiming that she'd intentionally stopped going to probation meetings so that she could get in front of a judge and argue that the sentence she was serving was illegal. Ontario County Court Judge Lisa Toole told Aaso that her actions reflected she did what she wanted whenever she wanted, which Toole stated she wouldn't tolerate as she handed her the 6-month sentence. Number 6. Theresa Brennan. In January of 2020, disgraced Livingston County Judge Theresa Brennan was sentenced to 6 months in jail, an additional 18 months of probation, and 200 hours of community service. Some of those in attendance clapped, with the courtroom echoing chants of "Power to the people," and one spectator reportedly shouting, "Welcome to your nightmare," following the announcement of the sentence. A few years prior, she'd been charged with perjury, tampering with evidence, and misconduct in office, all of which are felonies. Most of the legal turbulence surrounding Brennan arose from the murder trial of Jerome Kowalski. He'd been convicted of killing his brother Richard and his wife Brenda, who'd been found dead at their Osceola Township home in May of 2008. Brennan had had an affair with Michigan State Police investigator Sean Furlong, a lead witness for the prosecution. She failed to disclose the relationship, which was ultimately deemed gross misconduct. And in light of the scandal, Kowalski's conviction was vacated, prompting a retrial. During her consequent divorce case, Brennan committed perjury by lying about a cell phone that was a marital asset and tried to delete evidence from it. She was removed from the bench by the Michigan Supreme Court in June of 2019, and her license was later suspended. Brennan entered a plea agreement in which the other charges were dropped in favor of her pleading guilty to perjury. In court, Brennan spoke about the shame and remorse she'd felt throughout the legal proceedings and concluded with a plea for mercy. Perjury carried a maximum jail term of 15 years, but as per the agreement, her sentence was far lighter. Number 5. Tracy Hunter. Former Hamilton County Juvenile Court Judge Tracy Hunter had to be dragged out of the courtroom at her 2019 sentence execution hearing as she went completely limp when her 6-month jail sentence was pronounced. The legal matter dated back to her 2014 conviction for unlawful interest in a public contract. Hunter's brother Stephen was an employee at the juvenile court. In 2013, he'd hit an offender during an arrest and was in the process of getting fired. It was alleged that Hunter had passed confidential documents to Stephen in hopes that it would help him keep his position. The former Ohio judge considered the charges unrighteous and unlawful, arguing that she hadn't helped secure employment for her brother, who'd worked for the court for 7 years before she became a judge. Protesters claimed Hunter was being discriminated against because of her race and prominence as the first ever African American elected to Hamilton County's juvenile court. In spite of numerous appeals and efforts to have her conviction overturned, the sentence was upheld and Hunter was sent to jail. Number 4. Thomas J. Maloney. Throughout the years, multiple media outlets have named Thomas J. Maloney as the worst judge in history. He was brought down as part of Operation Greylord, a joint effort by multiple agencies including the FBI, the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, and the Internal Affairs Division of the Chicago Police Department. The operation targeted corruption in the judiciary system of Cook County, Illinois, a scandal in which Maloney became the most prominent figure. Maloney was a boxer in his youth before becoming a lawyer in the early 1950s. He established underworld connections and even secured payment to a judge for a murder acquittal. The Illinois Supreme Court named him a judge in 1977, and he quickly established a reputation as a man who could be bribed regardless of the case's gravity. The Chicago Tribune would describe him as the first and only Cook County judge to have rigged murder cases for cash. For several years, he'd managed to maintain a public image of unwavering toughness as a judge, while consistently receiving bribes and even treating defendants harshly if they didn't pay him. As Operation Greylord slowly gathered evidence against him, Maloney was indicted in 1991, much to the surprise of everyone in Cook County. Some of his most egregious rulings included the acquittal of hitman Lenny Chow and other members of the On Leong Mafia in a murder case dating back to 1981, just 4 years after he'd taken the bench. In exchange for a bribe of roughly $5,000, Maloney acquitted Owen Jones of felony murder for beating a man to death with a pipe during a burglary. He was instead sentenced to voluntary manslaughter, which cut his sentence down to 9 years instead of 20 for murder. Maloney was also on the verge of interfering in a case involving 2 members of the El Rucan street gang, accused of a double homicide, but eventually pulled out after discussing bribery terms with one of the gang's generals. In some cases, bailiff Lucius Robinson, who later testified against him, had acted as the bagman for Maloney and was later replaced by the judge's friend and fellow lawyer Robert McGee, who also cooperated with the authorities. For his crimes, Maloney served 12 years in prison from 1994 to 2007. Number 3. Mark Chavella and Mark Conahan. The Kids for Cash incident of 2008 is one of the most prominent and publicized scandals involving judges to have occurred in recent years. Mark Chavella and Mark Conahan were judges at the Luzerne County Court of Common Pleas in Pennsylvania. They were found guilty of accepting money in exchange for imposing unusually harsh adjudications on youths in order to increase the occupancy of for-profit juvenile detention centers. Conahan used his position to stop funding towards the county's public detention facility and instead sent juvenile defendants to for-profit facilities that had been newly built in exchange for kickbacks from those who owned and operated the facilities. He agreed to generate at least $1.3 million in annual receivables, which would be supported by the taxpayers. What this basically meant was that he, like Chavella, was illegally paid to send as many defendants to the facilities as quickly as he could without arousing suspicion. Lawyers from Philadelphia's non-profit Juvenile Law Center, whom several juveniles had sought for legal advice, found that hundreds of cases had been tried without the defendants receiving proper counsel. Chavella was alleged to have received $2.6 million in kickbacks from the same detention facilities. In return, he sentenced children to extended stays for minimal offenses such as trespassing in a vacant building, marking a principal on MySpace, or shoplifting DVDs from a Walmart. Thousands of youths were affected by the two judges' actions. In 2010, Conahan pleaded guilty to 1 count of racketeering conspiracy and was sentenced to 17.5 years in a federal prison. The following year, Chavella went to trial and was given a sentence of 28 years in a federal prison. Today's topic was requested by Timothy Huckabee 1543 and Hot Rod Eldorado 811. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Samuel Kent. From 2003 to 2007, case manager Kathy McBroom suffered repeated abuse at the hands of her boss, Samuel B. Kent, a Texas federal judge in the Galveston division. A former high school athlete described as a larger-than-life figure, Kent wielded immense power in the city, referring to himself as the Lion King or the Emperor of Galveston. He took advantage of his position to have his way with McBroom during her employment, believing she'd be too intimidated to report him. In one incident on March the 23rd of 2007, he called her to his chambers and asked for a hug. She reluctantly accepted after telling him it was inappropriate. When the mother of 3 got close to him, the judge pulled her bra and blouse up, then started touching her inappropriately. He forced her head towards his crotch while explicitly telling her, as she struggled, what he wanted to do to her. The sound of footsteps outside the room interrupted them, and McBroom left the chambers crying. While working for Kent, she'd experienced 15 to 20 incidents of harassment, at least 5 of which involved inappropriate touching. The incident in 2007 prompted her to launch a formal complaint against Kent and request immediate transfer. The following year, Kent was indicted in federal court on 3 counts of abusive contact. He thus became the first federal judge to be charged with federal crimes of such nature. Also joining the case against him was testimony from Kent's former secretary, Donna Wilkerson, whom he'd pressed against the door and forcefully kissed on the mouth on her 5th day on the job. Similar and worse inappropriate behavior towards her continued for 7 years. Another charge leveled against Kent was obstruction of justice for lying to investigators about what he'd put the 2 employees through. Under an agreement, the other charges were dropped and he was sentenced to 33 months in prison for obstruction. President Barack Obama accepted his resignation on June the 30th of 2009. In case you're still craving more They Will Kill You content today, we will be lining up our previous release about the 10 toughest American judges around right after number 1. Stick around if you'd like. Number 1. Lance Mason. Lance Timothy Mason served as a judge on the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas and from 2007 to 2008 as a member of the Ohio Senate. Mason and his wife, Aisha Nee Fraser, became separated in March of 2014. In August of that same year, he was arrested and charged for brutally beating her while he was driving, and their 2 daughters were in the back seat. According to the police report, Mason punched Fraser 20 times with his fist, repeatedly smashed her head against the center console, and relentlessly struck, bit, and threatened her life after she'd exited the car.
911, Shaker Police, emergency.
Yes, my husband just beat me and threw me out the car. He has my 2 daughters in the car.
Where you at?
Van Aken Boulevard.
Yeah.
And like Avalon. He just threw me out the car. Orange Saturn View 2008. I'm afraid he's going to hurt my daughters.
Is he with you now, or did he
No,
drive off?
He drove off.
Which way on Van Aken?
He went going down towards the police station. He probably hit Chagrin.
On the day of his arrest, the authorities seized a small arsenal from the judge's home. It included shotguns, handguns, and semi-automatic rifles, as well as smoke grenades, a sword, a bulletproof vest, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. On August 13th, he pleaded guilty to domestic violence and attempted felonious assault. The Ohio Supreme Court suspended him from practicing law, and in mid-September, he submitted his resignation as a judge. He was ultimately sentenced to a prison term of 2 years and was released after 9 months. On November the 17th of 2018, in the driveway of a house owned by his sister, Mason once again attacked Fraser. He stabbed her repeatedly in front of their 2 children aged 8 and 11 and left her to die. Fraser eventually succumbed to her wounds. Responding officers arrived to the address in Shaker Heights, at which point Mason tried to flee in the victim's SUV. In doing so, he slammed into a police cruiser, injuring an officer. Body cam footage would then show him running back into the house, from where he was apprehended without incident. While sitting in handcuffs in front of the house, Mason was recorded saying, "I cannot believe I did this." He pled guilty to the murder and was sentenced to life in prison, with the chance of parole after 35 years, meaning he'd be in his late 80s, if released. Florida Judge Merrilee Ehrlich was removed from her post after a video emerged in which she berated a sick defendant during a hearing on April the 15th of 2018. 59-year-old Sandra Twiggs, who suffered from asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, was attending a hearing via video stream due to her health complications. Ehrlich grew irritated after Twiggs attempted to expound upon her answers on multiple occasions and coughed repeatedly. The judge could be heard ordering the ill woman not to say anything beyond what was being asked of her. When the defendant attempted to explain her health issues, Ehrlich refused to listen. 2 days after the hearing, Twiggs passed away at her home. Ehrlich was accused of aggressive and tyrannical behavior by public defender Howard Finkelstein in a letter addressed to Chief Administrative Judge Jack Tutter. In the aftermath of the incident, she was requested not to return to the bench. Number 9. Elizabeth Shearer.
You need to sit down right now. You're out of line. In fact, you're excused. You need to go sit in the back with your chief public defender.
Florida Circuit Judge Elizabeth Shearer, who presided over the Parkland school shooting case, had a heated confrontation with 2 of Nicholas Cruz's public defenders, Gordon Weeks and David Wheeler, on November the 1st of 2022. The argument occurred during Cruz's sentencing hearing, when Weeks and Wheeler expressed the sentiment that their team was being personally attacked by the parents of the victims. Weeks asked the judge to forbid the parents from using the court as a platform to vent their frustrations, considering their statements as an incitement to violence. Assistant State Attorney Carolyn McCann protested, stating it was their right to express themselves and that they'd only responded to the question, "Would you like to say something on behalf of the victim you are representing?" Shearer ordered the defense attorneys to sit down, but Weeks instead approached the stand, accusing the judge of expressing the same misdirected anger toward the defense team as the victim's parents. When Shearer once more ordered him to take a seat, Weeks asked multiple times for a sidebar or recess, but his petitions were denied. Sher subsequently admonished the defense for laughing with their client and even making an obscene gesture at the court during the trial. She reprimanded the men for mentioning her own children in their argument, telling them they were out of line and stating they'd be moving on to sentencing, prompting weeks to storm out of the courtroom. Number 8. John McBain.
You were relentless. You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead.
When 31-year-old Camilla Gammitt laughed during her victim's family impact statements on April the 16th of 2014, Jackson County, Missouri judge John McBain furiously admonished her. Gammitt, who was accused of fatally stabbing her boyfriend, 38-year-old Marcel Hill, 11 times, rolled her eyes and interrupted a statement being made by Hill's aunt. McBain subsequently warned the woman he'd duct tape her mouth closed if she didn't shut up. He went on to call the case one of the worst cold-blooded murders he'd ever seen. During sentencing, McBain once more expressed resentment towards Gammitt, stating, "You gutted him like a fish in that apartment. I hope you die in prison. If this was a death penalty state, you'd be getting the cheer." Gammitt was sentenced to life in prison. The lawyers indicated they would appeal the punishment, claiming their client had acted in self-defense. Number 7. Aubrey Rymes. On January the 7th of 2021, Pike County, Missouri judge Aubrey Rymes got into a physical altercation with a defendant, 27-year-old Sidney Newsom. The latter, who'd been charged with domestic violence, grew irate during the court proceedings and proceeded to throw a stack of papers at the judge. After the bailiff had been unable to restrain him, Rymes stepped out of his seat and pinned the defendant on the table until deputies entered the courtroom and took charge of the situation. Newsom's brother was subsequently arrested for getting involved in the struggle. Newsom had counts of contempt of court and simple assault added to his list of offenses. Fortunately, no one got hurt during the fight. Nevertheless, it was reported that security would be increased during the remainder of the case's proceedings in order to keep everyone involved safe. Number 6. Wayne Calver.
Hold on. Sir, I'm doing something. Can you shut up and sit down? That's not shutting up. You want to be held in contempt and go to jail? I asked you a question. Then shut up.
Florida Judge Wayne Calver faced a possible suspension of up to 60 days for getting into heated arguments with several defendants, cursing in court and unlawfully sentencing someone to 537 days in jail for contempt. The first incident took place on January the 25th of 2022. When the defendant interrupted the proceedings, Calver told him that if he spoke out of term again, he'd be charged with contempt of court, leading to additional time in jail. He issued an initial sentence of 179 days, which sparked a back and forth that led to Calver warning, "If you keep on interrupting us, you're going to have the jail renamed after you." By the end of the contentious interaction, Calver had sentenced the defendant to 537 days behind bars. He went back on this sentence, however, as it wouldn't be legally enforceable, and reduced the ruling to 179 days. The second incident occurred on February the 10th of 2022. It reportedly involved 50-year-old Kevin Newton, who'd arrived late to his hearing and was trying to take his seat when Calver demanded he sit down and shut up. When the defendant replied, the judge threatened to hold him in contempt of court while issuing him an expletive-laden insult. For his inappropriate outbursts, Calver was recommended an unpaid 60-day suspension and was also ordered to complete an anger management and sensitivity training course. Number 5. Vonda Evans. On June the 2nd of 2017, a man was removed from a Detroit courtroom following a heated verbal exchange with the judge. 46-year-old Anthony Thornton, who was accused of criminal misconduct, screamed at Judge Vonda Evans, "I'm innocent," before hurling profanities at her. Evans demanded the defendant be quiet, but when he refused, she instructed court officials to remove him, saying, "I'm not even going to dignify that comment." Thornton was taken from the courtroom and Evans continued with the hearing, in which it was determined that the defendant would be found not guilty of kidnapping, but guilty of unlawful imprisonment and misconduct. Before ending the proceedings, the judge ordered Thornton to be brought back so she could further reprimand him for his actions. The defendant subsequently apologized for the outburst. During a previous unrelated sentencing hearing on January the 23rd of 2017, Judge Evans was involved in a similarly contentious interaction when she scolded a defense attorney for accusing her of not properly reviewing a report. The lawyer, Terry Price, had requested a day to further review the documents, but was only allowed an hour. Price proceeded to tell Evans she didn't have enough time to properly read the report either, but the judge sternly ordered him to drop the issue. Number 4. Matthew Sypniewski. Dutch judge Matthew Sypniewski from Rotterdam called 29-year-old Daquan Green a sociopath during a sentencing hearing on January the 21st of 2021. Green, who'd been found guilty of second-degree murder, professed his innocence throughout the trial, prompting Sypniewski to angrily rebuke him, saying, "You are not just a murderer, you are a sociopath." Green was sentenced to 25 years, likely to be served in a maximum security facility, although Sypniewski remarked that he wished he could have given him a life term without the possibility of parole. Number 3. Olu Stevens. Kentucky Judge Olu Stevens of the Judicial Circuit that presides over Jefferson County sentenced Adam Satterley to 60 days in jail after he used a racial slur in court. On January the 4th of 2016, Satterley reportedly issued the racially charged insult in response to Stevens revoking his bond. The judge at first seemed willing to let the remark go, but subsequently ordered the defendant back into the courtroom, at which point he asked Satterley if he had anything to say about the insult. The defendant denied having addressed the court, stating he'd been speaking to his brother, but Stevens wasn't swayed by his explanation. He reprimanded Satterley, warning him never to use the word in question again, after which he sentenced him to 60 days in jail. Number 2. Robin Leonitis. On February the 5th of 2020, Judge Robin Leonitis was publicly reprimanded for intemperate behavior during proceedings of the Florida Supreme Court. Leonitis had allegedly made inappropriate remarks about defendants Skylar Francis and Anthony Welch during hearings in November of 2018 and March of 2021. The most incendiary statements were made during sentencing. In one case, Leonitis told the defendant he wasn't worthy of life in prison, while she wished another would have to fight for his life every minute of every day. The Supreme Court admonished the judge for her comments, determining it had served only the purpose of abusing and insulting the recipients. Leonitis admitted her problematic behavior and was ordered to undergo stress management counseling to help with her outbursts.
And we required you to appear here today for this public reprimand in this public forum. For these failings, Judge Leonitis, you are hereby publicly reprimanded. You're now free to leave.
Number 1. Eugene Luchi. On March the 1st of 2019, 32-year-old Manson Bryant accused Ohio Judge Eugene Luchi of being racially biased against him after he was sentenced to 22 years in prison for aggravated burglary, robbery, and kidnapping. Bryant unloaded a minutes-long tirade, repeatedly insulting the judge and calling him a racist. During the sentencing hearing, Luchi felt Bryant had shown some remorse for his crimes, leading him to decide against giving the defendant the maximum possible term of 28 years behind bars. Following Bryant's outburst, however, he extended the original sentence. The interaction in question wasn't the first time Bryant and Luchi had gotten into an argument in court. Back in 2014, the former had snapped at the judge after pleading guilty to receiving stolen property and receiving a year in prison as punishment. The man's legal defense team filed an appeal against Luchi's decision, with the Supreme Court reportedly ruling 4-3 in favor of Bryant.
Let him go. Let me out! Let's take him out. Let me out, man! I swear to God, turn up in this.
Does counsel waive the...
Let me out!
Thanks for watching. Would you rather sit on the jury for a trial that lasts 6 months or spend a week in jail? Let us know in the comments section below.